Francis Bacon. You know, the name probably rings a bell. You're thinking, father of the scientific method, a giant of the Elizabethan age. And yeah, that's what we think we know. But the man we all celebrate is actually, well, he's packed with contradictions. He's like a historical puzzle box. And today, we're going to pry it open.
So, let's just start with a really quick question. When I say the name Francis Bacon, what's the very first image that pops into your head? Seriously, take a second. What do you see?
Okay, did you picture the 20th century artist, the one famous for those really raw, kind of disturbing paintings? Or maybe you thought of the English cricketer, the engineer who developed the fuel cell. There was even an American football player. If you thought of any of those, you're not wrong, but you might just be thinking of the wrong guy. It turns out history is just full of famous people named Francis Bacon.
The man at the center of our little investigation today is this one, the original, the Elizabethan philosopher, the guy who really did help shape the modern world. But, as we're about to find out, even when you've got the right man, he is far from simple.
All right, let's get into that puzzle box. Our first case file, Bacon's really strange and totally contradictory relationship with one of the biggest legal and philosophical ideas of his time, something called natural law.
So, just to make sure we're all on the same page, what even is natural law? Well, at its core, it's this idea that there are universal truths, these fundamental moral laws that are just built right into the fabric of nature itself. They exist whether governments write them down or not. You can almost think of it as a kind of cosmic moral compass.
Now here's where it gets really weird. This slide shows this split personality. On one hand, you've got Bacon the philosopher. In all his big, famous works, he's almost totally silent on natural law. He just avoids these huge, abstract ideas. But then you have Bacon the lawyer, and in the courtroom, whoa, he's a completely different person. He's constantly making arguments based on the infallible grounds of nature and common reason. And look, this isn't just our interpretation. This is from one of his legal reports back in 1606. In his own words, when the laws were murky, when the path forward wasn't clear, what did Bacon the lawyer fall back on? The law of reason and the law of nations. I mean, that's textbook phrasing for natural law. The philosopher, he dodged it, but the lawyer, he used it like a master key. It's just a fascinating contradiction.
But the whole puzzle of Bacon the lawyer versus Bacon the philosopher, that's really just the beginning. The contradictions, believe me, they run so much deeper. So now we're going to turn from his professional life to a conflict that was happening at the very soul of his scientific project.
You know, we're often taught that Bacon was the guy who helped kick God out of the laboratory, that his whole scientific method was this purely secular tool for understanding a material world. But like everything else with Bacon, that is not the complete picture, not by a long shot.
For a long time, a lot of scholars have argued exactly that. The thinking basically goes that Bacon was this super savvy political operator. He used religious language as a kind of camouflage, to make his radical, secular, science-first agenda a little easier for the religious society of his day to swallow. But there's this huge piece of evidence that tells a completely different story. It's his own unfinished work of fiction, this utopian tale he called New Atlantis. And when you actually look closely at it, you don't find some cynical manipulator. You find a vision for the future that seems to be powered by a really profound and sincere Christian faith.
So let's dig into this utopian vision for a second. Because the origin story of his perfect, scientific society, it's not a story about human reason winning the day. No, it's a story about a divine miracle. So get this, how did his scientific utopia find its faith? Bacon's story is just incredible. It wasn't through missionaries, it wasn't through some rational argument, nope. It was a pure miracle. One night, this massive pillar of light with a cross on top just appears on the ocean. A wise man from their top scientific institution prays, and the light reveals a floating ark. And what's inside? Not scientific instruments, but the Holy Scriptures, delivered directly from God. And the message inside that ark, in a letter, was totally explicit. This was not some philosophical text. It was a promise of salvation, coming directly from God through Jesus. I mean, this is the foundation myth of Bacon's scientific utopia.
So here's the crucial point, right? The father of the scientific method, the man who was all about observation and evidence, founded his ideal society on an event that is a pure, undeniable divine miracle. That just doesn't sound like someone who's just using religion as a tool. That sounds like a true believer.
So,
where does all this leave us? We have a man who seems to be two completely different things at once, a practical lawyer and an abstract philosopher, a man of science and a man of deep, abiding faith. How on earth do you reconcile these two halves?
Who was the real Francis Bacon? Was he the hard-nosed pragmatist who would use whatever argument he needed to win a case? Was he the visionary scientist who also happened to believe in miracles from God? Was he the religious prophet whose entire utopia was built on faith? The answer, it seems, is yes, he was all of them.
And you know what? Maybe that's the real key to understanding him. His genius wasn't in being perfectly consistent. It was in his incredible ability to contain these massive contradictions, to hold the practical and the ideal, the scientific and the spiritual, all together at the same time. And it was right there, in that very tension, that he found the energy that literally changed the world.
It all leaves us with one last kind of provocative question. We tend to demand consistency from our great minds, right? But maybe, just maybe, it's the ones who are messy, the ones who are contradictory, the ones who can hold two opposing ideas in their head at the same time. Maybe they're the ones who truly have the power to shape our future.